But our country has quite a number of things that are happening, and it all revolves around leadership. If the leadership behaves, then everything under them will behave. Welcome. In the studio with me, I have Matthew Wasonga. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I also have George Ngaira.
Thank you very much for having me, Fred.
Now, maybe our activists, we all know that Tanzania is not a democratic country. They are pretenders to the throne. And this has not started just the other day. The opposition leader, Tundu Lissu, was shot and almost killed, I think, during Kikwete's or Magufuli's. During Magufuli's period, he was shot. It was an attempted murder. He recovered, and now he's back. And then Mama Suluhu, number one, has barred his party from participating in the election. They've arrested him. And now our activists who've kept President William Ruto company, they've given him company here in Kenya, decided that they are going to take the same thing to TZ, and it didn't go down very well, did it? So, your thoughts about the whole thing. Suluhu says we are taking our bad manners to them. Your thoughts?
Fred, maybe that's our opinion in as far as manners are concerned, because they say beauty is in the eyes of the observer. Somebody else might think that maybe it's them who are mannerless.
Yes.
And so they need to embrace our manners.
Yes.
But Fred, once again, this shows that Kenya is in isolation as far as political democracy is concerned in the East African region. Because then you realize amongst the countries that form the East African community, then Fred, it seems like I thought it was just Kenya and Tanzania. But you know, clearly Tanzania is yet to evolve, in the words of the Foreign Affairs PS. He said maybe they're still evolving. And I think that could be very true, that they're still evolving. And therefore, when you look at Somalia and what's happening in Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, in Uganda as well, Rwanda, there's hardly no opposition as well, Burundi and Congo, and now Tanzania. It means that then we are all alone as far as a modernized democracy is. Because there are things that have happened in this country, Fred, you wouldn't want to imagine they would happen in those countries. We had a presidential petition which succeeded, and the president was almost sent home. And the people lived to tell.
Yes.
You understand?
Yeah. They're still alive and walking around.
We have a president who's narrowly survived a civil coup, you know, a civilian coup, because the people went on the streets. And had they succeeded, that would have been considered a civilian coup, because it wasn't the military, but largely the public. And once again, we had a president who narrowly escaped that. So those are things that haven't quite happened in those other countries. And I think it's very unfortunate that our very only other ally that would have said and could claim that has had some fair amount of stability has been Tanzania. And we were hoping that they can now transition into the next dispensation of a democracy that then allows everybody to be able to express himself. I've once met Tundu Lissu. Tundu came here when he was actually hospitalized here. And at one time he was at Nairobi Hospital for quite a long time. That's where he got his medication before he left to go overseas. And so a very jovial person, and he was actually shot 21 times.
Yes, as somebody who wanted to make sure this guy is dead.
It's just that the bullets missed out the important organs. Otherwise, they took him out completely.
21 times?
Absolutely.
21 bullets went through his body.
He was supposed to be dead. But you know, the God of wonders always sometimes comes up for us, and he survived. It's unfortunate that there's a country now, Tanzania is still a country where that a president can ban a party. You know, there are those constitutional rights that are enshrined in the bill of, a whole chapter on human rights, in the Bill of Rights that we have. There's absolutely nowhere a president can come and say, I want this party not to exist. When you have a country like that one, then those are the manners that we actually do not need to embrace.
Yeah, those are bad manners.
Those are the manners that absolutely. Yes. And I think it's very unfortunate that Tanzania is heading back to such a direction. Yes.
Okay, I think, thank you, Fred, for having me. I think having witnessed what's happened in Tanzania of late, I only learned one thing, that as Kenyans, we should learn something, that where we've gone as far as democracy and human rights is concerned, we should safeguard it. Because if we look at what is happening in Tanzania, I don't think it can happen here in Kenya. That can tell Kenyans and our leaders that we are in another level as far as democracy is concerned. But again, the good president of Tanzania, it's quite unfortunate that, you know, in our society, we know that mothers are always good caregivers. They know how to take care of them. That's why you'll find that even in a society, in absence of a father, a mother can still take care of the home. But what we are witnessing from the Tanzania's mother is quite a different story, whereby you decide...
It's where a combination of power getting to your mind.
Exactly, and overtaking your mind and your sense of reasoning. You know, because I don't understand why he has to ban that party and dismiss the party and even charge Tundu Lissu with treason. And from what we can see, because, you know, it's not that Tanzania is far away from us, we can at least observe what is happening over there. We've not seen anything out of normal. Actually, what has happened here in Kenya are worse than what happened to Suluhu. You know, in Kenya, as my friend said, is whereby a civil coup almost succeeded in this country. So I don't know what, if it was in Tanzania, what the good president could have done. And also, not only in Tanzania, we can also even see what is happening in our neighboring country, Uganda. It's more or less the same thing.
Yes, it
if
is.
you realize, both the opposition parties in those two countries are facing treason charges. Not because they've committed any kind of treason against that government, but because they've just decided to become an opposition in that government and put the government of the day into check. And maybe if you look at what Tundu Lissu was advocating for in Tanzania, this guy was just saying, let's have election reforms. Okay? And even if you look at the t-shirt he was putting on, it was no reforms, no election. Generally, he was not advocating for Suluhu to be overthrown or out of power or any other thing, but he was just advocating that let's have a democratic election and we have reforms. But as dictatorship might say, the good mother decided to put it behind bars and ban his party.
Do you think it's overzealous for the civil society leaders in our country to go and try and take that agenda to a different country, knowing very well what happens in that country?
Maybe they assumed that the freedom they enjoy here in Kenya is everywhere. You know, sometimes it's bad that when if you are being raised in a very free environment, you might tend to assume that things are the same everywhere. Yeah, you know, that's my thinking. They assume that the way they could put President William Ruto, you know, here in Kenya, our agencies can just wake up and do whatever they want to the president, including some AI images to the social media, and nothing will happen because we enjoy that democratic rights and freedom of expression. So I think these are civil activists assume that the same thing could happen to the other country. Unfortunately, that is another territory with different arrangement.
Different laws, different environment.
Yes, but having said that, I think it's good for the East African community to face reality and safeguard the human right of every country. So that even if a citizen of another country, then unless it is something that is out of, is somehow unconstitutional. But now, going for the human right and trying to fight for the human right, it's something that should be punished by any government. I think that's where the East African community should now come in and put things in order, so that everybody within the East African community can enjoy the freedom of expression and their rights being safeguarded.
I wanted to say that it's not overzealous. You know, as Christians, we are taught to be our brothers' keepers, but also as legitimate members of the East African community, we have a duty to ensure that, and a written duty, because there's an agreement that now brings all of us together as an East African community that actually sets standards of how our countries should be able to operate and gives each of our citizens some sort of legitimacy in terms of involvement in other people's affairs. Remember, today you can travel with your ID across 6 countries. You can go to Tanzania, with the exception of Tanzania. You can go to all the other 5 countries.
Tanzania will not allow you to go through. You still have to use your passport.
Because of some reasons. it was political reasons that they had an economic. They kept saying that there would be intrusion by the stronger Kenyan economy. More Kenyans will flop there. I remember that debate. I followed it in their local parliament, and they were saying all of a sudden we'll have Kenyan engineers here who school better, get our jobs. So there was some sort of fear. So Tanzania is the only country in East Africa where you cannot go with your ID, but otherwise in Uganda, in Rwanda, in South Sudan, you can go with your ID, and I think the same has been extended to Congo. And you don't no longer need a visa because Congo was never part of the East African community. Now it's part of East African community. So my brother Matthew can land in Kinshasa and just go about his business, which is what the East African community is all about. And therefore, what happens in the next country is very important to us because of the open borders. And a risk in the other country has an impact to what happens here. And therefore, if there's an issue in a particular country, particularly those of us who are assigned to the East African community, I think it's a legitimate issue that is of concern and not just being overzealous. It's unfortunate that 60 years after independence and at a time when you're turning into a new millennium, that you can still go back to the era where you have a de facto president, a president that is able to ban a party and say, you know, that's what happened in Senegal. You know, President Macky Sall actually had banned Osman Sonko. Osman Sonko from running as a candidate and even banned the party. And not just that, he even jailed them. And they were in jail up to almost a week to the election. And they came out. They successfully locked him out, but they didn't lock the people out. So he just needed to get a replacement. And the people showed up, and they sent President Macky Sall home. President Macky Sall left stadium and went to the airport and has never come back to this day. And he was very strategic because the airport was just 20 minutes away from the stadium. So they thought he was going back to State House for the dinner, you know, the evening state dinner. And actually went to the airport and he's never come back. Because the people he had just jailed 2 weeks ago.
We're going to deal with it.
Absolutely, and he's never come back. He's now a wanted man. It's like African leaders never learn. And Samia Suluhu is one of them, because I thought she was going to melt down off what had happened with President Magufuli. And there was a lot of issues that were raised during his time as far as extrajudicial killings are concerned.
Magufuli's
President Magufuli. And so Samia Suluhu actually embraced Tundu Lissu and the opposition and brought him back. Remember, he was in exile. By the time President Magufuli was dying, and they agreed that they're going to transition Tanzania into a new democracy, and she was willing to open up to new legislation. It's unfortunate that today President Suluhu can say that that he has banned the leading opposition party, and I think that will just ache the public more, so that maybe we might have some unfortunate results, because President Magufuli's work results that he had done in a first term gave him a landslide that CCM almost got 90% of parliament. Even in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam, a place that I've lived, there are areas, you know, Dar es Salaam, just like here in Nairobi, it has strongholds of different parties. There are areas which are traditionally opposition areas because of the region where they were coming from, the coastal communities. Dar es Salaam is at the coast of Tanzania. And, you know, President Magufuli is a northerner, he's a Msukuma from these sides of Nyanza, Mwanza area. And so those people always compete, not maybe openly to say intercommunity the way they do, but there's still an acknowledgement that this is a northerner and we are the coastal people. And so they have that challenge of the northerners have gone to school, they're more educated, the coastal people, just like the way you have here in Kenya. You know, the people at the coast haven't quite benefited from good education, so they can't compete in a fair system, even if they wanted to, because they can't qualify because of what they call the historical injustices. It's the same story that we've had in Dar es Salaam. Never mind, they've had an opportunity to have presidents from very small communities. President Kikwete from a very small community in Bagamoyo, somewhere down there at the coast. And I think Magufuli was the first president to come from a big community, because Nyerere also came from a very small community. But they do have those pockets of a rivalry between themselves. But there are areas in Dar es Salaam where ideally you'd never expect CCM to win, because like in many other countries in the world, the cities are usually the headquarters of opposition. You go to London, it's the Labour. You go to New York and California, it's Democrats. It's always the leftist kind of politics. So it's very hard for government to win in Dar es Salaam. But this time around, President Magufuli was able to sweep up some very important seats. And there are people who actually just voted, not because they loved CCM, but because they loved what Magufuli had done as far as dealing with corruption and good governance is concerned. In 6 years that President Magufuli was president, he only traveled 5 times. And never left the continent. Five times? 5 times in 6 years. He only came here, he went to Burundi, he went to Namibia, and South Sudan, 2 other countries, African countries. In 6 years, I never boarded a plane to go to anywhere, not even Dubai, which is just 4 hours away, because he was minding the resources of the people of Tanzania. And he made sure that no minister, he never approved any minister to go for foreign trips in countries where they have embassies and have ambassadors who are able to execute those diplomatic duties, and saved a lot of money for the Tanzanian people. Our president has traveled 70 times and spent 7 billion. It's up to Kenyans to decide if that's sufficient.
He's traveled 70 times, spent 70 billion.
Yeah, because every time a president flies, it costs about 100 million. Because the president travels with a delegation of almost 50 to 100 people. And each one of them, when you look at the cost of plane, accommodation, and per diem, is almost 1 million. So every time the president boards a plane here, it costs taxpayers money 100 million shillings. So it's not very hard to do that mathematics. 100 times 70, it gives you about 7 billion of just globe-trotting by this president.
You can see since it's leadership, you can see how leadership frames a country. People don't care about your tribe, really.
Yes.
They just want, if you're performing well, they won't care where you come from. You can even come from those guys from South Africa who speak with a clack, clack, clack. As a president, if you perform well.
Alfred, for the benefit of the viewers, South Africa, just like Tanzania, you see President Cyril Ramaphosa comes from a very small community called the Venda in northern South Africa. I've gone through that place in 2010 when we had the World Cup, the road trip.
Oh, you went to watch the World Cup?
Yeah, we did that. We had a branding plan project we did with the Kampala coach, and so we are taking Kenyans to the World Cup. I did that trip for 10 days. So you go through, when you get to Gaborone, which is the capital of Botswana, it's pretty much like Nairobi to Namanga. It's like 2 hours to the border and then 2 hours to Pretoria. That Pretoria area is where that community of Venda comes from, which is where is northern South Africa. And this president comes from that community. They don't even have 1 million votes. Yet Cyril Ramaphosa is the president of South Africa. And I think also that was the same case with President Thabo Mbeki, who was a Xhosa. Xhosa is a minority community, even though it's a large one. But the Zulus are more fierce, and they are the majority community of
and it's obviously because
of a strong party.
Yeah, they strengthen you vote for the party.
That's what I'm saying.
You don't vote for individuals.
I was heading there that if we are able to, and I'm telling you, Fred, that's the one thing that will transform this country. If we're able to truly embrace what you call a parliamentary system of government, a hybrid one, like where people vote people vote, the public votes, but it elects parties. You understand? So that you do not deny that universal suffrage feeling of voters. People are being felt we've decided. But then it only elects MPs, and it's the MPs then who elects the leaders. Because then it allows the party to recall a leader anytime they don't feel them. They've sent home 2 presidents. And both presidents come from the biggest community in the country. Xhosa, President Thabo Mbeki is a Xhosa from Cape Town down there. He never finished his second term. President Zulu, who's the majority community in the country, also didn't survive to finish his term and even attempted to cling in office. And you remember what happened? They didn't just fire him, they jailed him. You understand? And that happens when you have very strong institutions that are able to now counter the divisions that we have. I hope this country can head that. I thought if President Uhuru Kenyatta had run that as a main issue for BBI besides devolution, I think BBI would have survived. Because most Kenyans, the only problem we had was in the mountain. The mountain was telling us stories of less constituencies. We have big numbers and less constituencies and things like that. So it's a good idea, but not fair to us. And we the Westerners said, we even double that number, but we're not complaining as much. Because we want first to have the system, then you can improve it. You see, you cannot complain over a leaking house when you don't even have a house. Have the house, and then we can say there's somewhere in the house where that is leaking. Then now we correct the area. So those are the challenges. But I think for Tanzania, that is the issue. I pray that we'll be able to turn around quickly and evolve.
How, in your opinion, did our Foreign Affairs Minister, or CS, Musalia Mudavadi, address that issue of Kenyans being locked in a foreign country?
I did so a letter, quoting some convention that did happen. But it lacked seriousness in it. whatever he addresses. Because you remember, even after he addresses, Boniface Mwangi was still missing. Only to
I actually watched him on TV and he was being grilled on the same.
Yes.
He had not called any of the people.
Exactly.
He had not made any calls to TZ.
And they have not even tried to contact the Tanzanians.
Nothing.
So it's like he didn't. So it's like, what happens?
Did not even summon the Tanzanian president to Kenya.
Exactly. The sad part is that...
Tanzanian ambassador in Kenya.
It was like he decided to say, you guys, you are disturbing us here in the country, and you've decided to take your bad manners to our neighbors.
Yes.
Deal with it. Because exactly that is what it is. He didn't make any effort in trying to... Remember, even the former Chief Justice was in Tanzania.
Yes.
And he was denied entry. A very senior, forget about, even if to him, Boniface Mwangi and other
is a nuisance.
Were a nuisance, but I don't think Martha Karua and Maranga could be a nuisance.
Yes.
Okay. We also saw the former Chief Justice Maranga. Actually, 2 former Chief Justices were in Tanzania just to listen to that case, and they were denied entry. So I think it could be a concern to our Foreign Affairs Ministry. Unfortunately, he didn't do anything about it. I want to say something on what you are saying of about the leadership and how they change the country. Fred, I think that as it is now, there is a wave of change coming in across Africa and across the country.
Yes.
Whereby a time will come whereby we will not elect leaders because you come from my tribe or you come from my political party. But we'll be busy looking at someone who will transform a country and bring the real changes. Because even if you look at our government today, I have some of my brothers coming from the central Kenya.
Yes.
Despite the fact that they've had like 3 presidents, that is Kenyatta, Junior, Kenyatta Senior, and Kibaki. They are still having some problems.
Yes.
Some of them are still having the worst life you can imagine of. So, of all the presidents, it has not benefited all of them. They still suffer just like any other Kenyan. So you can't say that if a president comes from my tribe, then I will automatically benefit.
I'm an example.
Exactly.
If I go to the supermarket, even if I say, hey, by the way, I'm president, I'm Kikuyu,
and even if you decided to start...
Uhuru is our president,
yes,
you see unga na 20 shillings.
It won't happen.
It won't happen.
So a time is coming and a change of wave is coming whereby we will not elect leaders because he come from my tribe, but we will go for real change, and those will benefit all Kenyans.
Let me ask you this. There's a gentleman, Oscar Sudi,
yes,
who congratulated the Tanzanian government,
yes,
for dealing with the activists. And you know, it just sends a very wrong picture, because seasons come and seasons go.
For Oscar Sudi, that is the result of electing a psychophant instead of a leader. Yes, just put it as just like that. Because when you elect a psychophant, you will never see anything wrong. You will just, he doesn't reason. Instead, he will just decide to borrow his brain and everything to whoever he want to, so that wherever they say, they will just say yes, sir. That's the problem. When you decided to give a psychophant a chance to lead, yeah.
So that's
I'm not even
leadership.
surprised. I'm not even surprised. I was not. I wasn't even surprised. I can even give you an example of there is another psychophant from Migori County called Junet Mohammed.
Yes.
I don't even decide surprised if he can give another such kind of a comment, because that is who they are. Yeah, and that's why I'm saying that this change of leadership, when it's come, then I believe that we won't have the Oscar Sudis in any leadership position of this country, because they don't add any value as far as this country is concerned. Okay, their main purpose is just to loot everything and anything they can come across. They cannot even reason, even for a second. Yeah, okay. For crying out loud, we can differ as Kenyans.
Yes.
But when a Kenyans in a problem, we tend to put our differences aside and say, this is a patriot.
Yes. Yes. If my enemy is attacked by a dog,
yes,
I will not sit back and just watch the dog attack this guy. I will definitely, this is a human being.
If not for anything else, let me save my enemy so that we can fight. Yeah. Yes. Okay?
Yes.
But now having the people like Oscar Sudi, Fred, you don't expect anything different.
Now,
it's just like an obvious thing.
You mentioned about corruption, and I'm seeing the amounts of money that are being lost at the Kenya Ports Authority, Gaira.
Yes.
Billions of shillings have been misused, and now we are having the Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua has actually become the money bag of KK.
Kindiki, not Rigathi.
Kindiki. Kithure Kindiki. Who did I say?
Rigathi Gachagua.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Kithure Kindiki. He has not had impact. Probably he has not had a very major impact to a point whereby we can easily confuse the names. What I'm saying is this. What I'm saying is this. There's a lot of money that is being lost. Billions of shillings.
Absolutely.
It is an unfortunate situation at a time like this.
You know, when one time the research company Ipsos did a perception index, a public process that was never challenged by anybody in court, and came out asking Kenyans who they think is the most corrupt Kenyan alive. And the president was awarded as the most corrupt Kenyan alive. And it was a public statement that was signed. And remember that time?
Yes,
it was
He was second. He was second.
No,
Globally, he was second.
Yes.
but
in
in the country,
But,
you know,
and
Kenya.
even petition, no, let me correct you. We petition because it was rigged. Globally was to be the first.
That as it may be, but for me, I'm saying
according to the Ipsos
statement and what they said, because at least there's a reference to it. I was in a class of taught, we call it law of taught, and I know what defamation means.
Yes.
You can only defame somebody if he's not
Yes.
what you are saying, but if it's proven that is what you are saying, that case ends there. That's why I think the president has never challenged that thing in court, because truth to fact, the president and the judiciary is very familiar of his name and his ID number. Remember, the president before he became deputy president had been to court many times, in many land cases. So he has no reputation. He can go back and say, you know, I was a pastor, and now these young men are now defaming me. And my point is this, that when you elect a leader of such repute, Fred, there's not much you can expect as far as improving the quality of governance is concerned. I think he's only a madman who would not expect that this would be one of the most corrupt governments in the world. Because this government, when they were campaigning, and you remember David Ndii correcting people and saying, we did not tell people we are going to fight corruption. Remember that statement from David Ndii?
Yes.
He said corruption was not in their manifesto. Yet Kenyans, that is their biggest issue. They say three of the biggest issues Kenyans have, they said, is corruption, tribalism, and poverty. They say if you can deal with those three, Kenyans will go a mile ahead. UDA said corruption is not their main agenda because that is their strength. You understand? And so
that's a low blow.
That is their strength because that's what they are known for. You understand? So I'm not shocked. I'm not shocked to see what happens at the port. Fred, I know that port. I grew up in Mombasa for 25 years. My family works in that port. I know the scale of business that is in that port. Anytime you hear, Fred, that there's a deficit of 10 million bags of maize and you're supposed to import and bring them here, that costs maybe 10, 15 billion. It comes through that port. When you hear that we're importing wheat, because wheat is a product that we eat every day, yet unfortunately, we don't produce in that scale because the mandazis and the cakes and the sweets and the breads that we have, all that is wheat, but we do not have the massive rice fields that we have. So we always have a deficit because many times they say rice is secondary to maize, but I think wheat is secondary to maize because wheat is consumed almost every day in the morning. Somebody is having some bread or some biscuit. So and all that is wheat, isn't it? And so and that's billions and billions. So we spend almost 400 billion shillings just importing food. You understand? And then we spend another 600 billion shillings importing oil. So those two products have an import bill of 1 trillion shillings. And all that comes to the port.
That is wheat and oil. Food. Let's just say food. So food is now at 1 trillion.
It's about 400. It's about 400 to 400. You know, to vary. Sometimes it varies with how the production is.
Yeah, because I remember there was a time it was at almost 500 million.
Because that year we had a hunger, you know, our farmers didn't produce. That's why I'm saying there's a variance depending with the harvest.
4, 5.
Yes. So depending with the kind of harvest that you have, and then the size of corruption for that year, because we might have a genuine We might have a genuine deficit of 3 million, and they can say 6 million.
Yes.
So it just depends on the appetite of corruption that year. But Fred, the point is that, that's almost a trillion shilling every year being spent on just logistics to getting the food and the oil and all that stuff. I mean,
that's a lot of money.
And it all goes through that port. That's why most of the millionaires, there's a joke that if you work at the port and come out poor, then you deserve to die poor. Because there's a place where the logistics are very high. So I'm not shocked with what has happened there. And I'm not even shocked with the name. It's just perfect for this MD, because that name is synonymous with stealing of public funds. And Fred, so I think Kenyans, I do believe they're not shocked. They expected it, because this president, I've said 1 billion times, didn't drop from heaven to become president. He was elected by people who knew him, and they were expecting this.
Last week we touched a little bit on the international politics.
Yes.
I was shocked. President Ramaphosa goes to the United States. In the Oval Office, I mean, he's toned down. That was mob justice. White South Africans, a group of them, who are still hung up on, the old ways of doing things, that they are more superior than the blacks, are now complaining that they're being persecuted simply because they're not getting what they used to get.
Yes.
And so they've started relocating to the States. But they are relocating to the States and claiming that they're being killed in droves. And now, President Trump talks down to a president of a country, producing pictures, claiming that whatever pictures have been put there of whites, claiming they're being killed or they're being burnt alive. And he says this is going to be a discussion during the G20 conversations. It is, I felt like that was very, very immoral. You don't bring a president and you start talking down to him. No wonder the BRICS thing is gaining traction.
I did watch it. It was so sad. But you know, when you decided to become, to behave like a beggar, or like a slave, you don't have a voice over your master. If I was President Ramaphosa,
yes,
I could have never stepped to US again and even talked to President Trump.
And not even at this time.
Yes.
Because after all, I'm elected by the people. And I have my own country, my rules, and how we do our things. You know, it's so hypocritic when I watch President Trump calling what is happening in South Africa genocide.
Yes.
But he could not even comment on what is happening to the young kids in Palestine. You know, and even ask, one of the things he asked President Ramaphosa is that, why have you not arrested this guy called Malema?
He shows complete ignorance,
you know,
of what happens.
He was like trying to dictate, telling President Ramaphosa that, let me dictate and tell you how you are going to govern your country. You know, and that is where some of our leaders get it all wrong. Remember what the Congo president guy also tell this guy, Tshisekedi, said about the M23.
Yes.
So sometimes you look at even our leaders, then you ask, what kind of leaders do we have? Okay, you are a president, for crying out loud. Why do you allow yourself to be humiliated?
In front of the media.
By a fellow president,
yes,
in front of media. And the guy was like speechless, almost kneeling down to beg.
And you see, America, in the States, the number of blacks that are killed by the police is unbelievable.
Yes.
So you come and you try and tell me that there are whites who are being killed in your country, yet there are blacks who are being shot and killed in the streets of America.
And you don't even comment, and you don't even say anything. If at all, even the whites in South Africa, they've even been so much radical, even to the black in South Africa. Okay, they've even created their own town that nobody get in if you are black.
Yes.
So it's like you have two countries in one. then the president who should supposed to unify, because as far as I'm concerned, you cannot, the number of blacks in South Africa are far much higher than those of the whites.
Yes.
So why then do this president now decided to be humiliated for all this? Or for what? Or at what gain?
I listened to I watched it and I was shocked.
Okay.
I mean, President.
I think, for the record, Fred, the US have really taken the Africans for a ride for a very long time.
Yeah.
And they've seen that we cannot stand on our own. And I think if all the elected leaders, the 53 president of the African countries, watched what happened to President Ramaphosa, then it would be a wake-up call to all the African leaders and tell them that, guys, it's time to wake up and mind our own business.
These countries...
Remember, when Trump first got into office, his first agenda was to deport. His main target was not to deport any other people, but to deport blacks, which means that now we want to deport these guys because they are taking space for the Americans. Okay?
It was very, very, very unfortunate.
It was very unfortunate, and I think that should be a wake-up call to all the 53 presidents of the African continent, and try to tell them that, guys, it is time to wake up.
Europe survives on resources from Africa.
And from that indication, it shows that America and the President Trump is not a friend of the African country. So even if today, we might differ with President William Ruto in whatever he's doing.
Yes.
But on this, I will support him now, go to try having friends with the Chinas and other guys. Because these guys, after all, as long as I've lived in this country, I've never seen any American working on the street of Kenya and even trying to construct even a dog kennel somewhere in the street. But you can walk and see Chinas around.
We don't want the Chinese to come and start doing hawking stuff.
No, they are not hawking, but I'm just telling you how friends, we can say Chinas are more friends to Kenyans than even the US. How then do you want to dictate us? This is my point, Fred. I'm not trying to let Chinas come and hawk. You can walk around the country and see Chinas constructing some construction around the country. Truth be told, have you ever seen American constructing anything in this country? Have not. So actually, who is our friend? And yet, these guys who does not even benefit it in any way still want to come and dictate us how they want us to do our own things. If you walk around, you'll see Wahindis with soaps everywhere, employing people. Okay, at least they create job to us. I've never seen American doing that, and still they want to come and dictate to us, emulate our president when they go there, like they did to Ramaphosa. The other day, their own senators come out and criticizing President William Ruto simply because President William Ruto was in China. It is not, this kind of dictatorship from the Americans will just be a wake-up call to African countries. And they said, now let's stop all this. Okay, after all, we are a country, we have resources, we can generate our own resources. So let us stand on our own. We are an independent country, have our own constitution. It is high time that we stand on our feet and say no to something and choose our friends wisely. Yes.
I like something that President Uhuru Kenyatta used to say. He would say that we will treat, the foreign policy was that we will treat the countries based on the way they treat us.
Exactly.
If you come trying to treat us like slaves, we will not deal with you.
We will not deal with you.
Yes.
Yes.
We have to operate from the same level, Ngaira.
Yes.
Because even from that, before Ngaira say something, from what happened at the Oval House, even if there was something President Ramaphosa wanted to benefit from the Trump government, I believe without off the camera, maybe Trump must have told him, for me to do this, you have to do this to the whites. Okay? Not minding what the whites in South Africa are also doing to the blacks in South Africa. So to him, what matters is not even the blacks.
It's the whites.
It's the whites.
Stick to bricks.
Yes, but this is a president of a whole country who want to govern both blacks and white. So I think to some extent, going back to what President Uhuru said, let's treat them just the same way they are treating us. If you treat us like friends, we be friends. If you treat us like slaves, then we don't have any business with you. Yes.
I think, Fred, we've seen the character of Donald Trump over time. And I'm shocked that even President Ramaphosa, this time when that has been a trending topic, the issue of racism and xenophobia in South Africa, this was the worst time to go and see Donald Trump. I think he would have allowed that to sort of mellow down, so that when you go there, he has a good platform to go and discuss other things. But Fred, again, I've said this before, African leaders have only themselves to blame, because they do not need to board planes to go and beg for money.
True.
President Magufuli borrowed nothing during the entire COVID season, not even 1 shilling from any of these Americans and their drugs. He kept that economy running at, some people say, at a great personal cost, but we leave that to God. Do you understand? Fred, we leave that to God.
Excuse me.
Sorry, so for me, you can imagine what can happen in this country. If today I gave you the budget estimates last week, I told you we have a budget of almost 3.8 to 4 trillion shillings.
Yes.
And we're going to spend in this next financial year 1.7 trillion shillings on recurrent expenditure.
Yes.
Then we have another 1.1 or 1.2 trillion shillings that is going to pay debt. So about 3 trillion shillings is just purely going to just on recurrent expenditure and paying debt. Not one single shilling is going to development. And then you have the county governments that are claiming almost 400 billion. That takes us to around 3.4, leaving us with less than 500 billion to be spread across 50 state departments. It means we don't have money for development, Fred. But one executive order that can cut down the state departments from 58 state departments to 20 state departments, as it was enshrined in the Kenyan Constitution. I told you of years before, Fred, how we arrived at 22 cabinet positions, a maximum.
Yes.
It is because they vetted all the functions that governments needed to run, and in the context of the devolution that had now been enshrined in the Constitution, where it was realized that then at the national level, we only need policy makers and not staff, because then the implementation was supposed to be done with the counties. That's why some of the big functions were all grouped together, so that we do not have to end up with the Department of Agriculture. Then you still have a water and irrigation minister, and you still have a minister for mining and blue economy. All these were agricultural functions. And at the national level, it was just to be handled by one cabinet secretary and one principal secretary, in as far as policy and legislation is concerned. But then budgeting and appropriation is captured in the county government budget, so that then there's no repetition. Because anytime you have a state department, it then assumes a national structure. So there are people being paid in 47 counties to just show up in offices, but they do not have any implementing budget that they have there running, and all that costs Kenyans. And yet it takes only one single executive order by the president to cut down the state departments from 58 to 20 and save 700 billion shillings, which can then now go into development. That only requires somebody who loves this country. And if he does that, this president will not need to board this plane and go and borrow even 1 shilling in the next financial year. It goes down to leadership, Fred. And Kenyans have a choice to make. They can choose if that is the way we need to proceed over the years, or can we take a drastic decision and be able to turn this country around to leaders who then at least respect the people's taxes, because these taxes do not come very easy. They are paid by everybody, and everybody deserves to be implemented. So for Ramaphosa, it's the same story, because the story of mismanagement of resources and corruption, Big himself, he has a big cases of corruption. Remember, Ramaphosa is part of the elite South Africans who are working with the whites at the time when the struggle for liberating the whites were concerned. He's a billionaire, by the way. Most people do not know that. He's a billionaire, and a black billionaire, which means he puts him in a very small percentage of South Africans who are making the money, but not the many other Africans and South Africans who are struggling. So he seems not to be resonating with what the people are saying, and might not be able to survive. I'm shocked he survived this election, but it was very narrow. Remember, he has a coalition government, because had President Zuma not split up and set up his third party, the Mohonto Sizwe party, then we just had one opposition. I think this president would have gone home, and the ANC would have collapsed for good. Because now that ANC has now been halved to almost 40%. So in the next election might be the end of ANC, because then if the other parties are fully embraced, because now President Zuma's party, Malema's party, and of course the DA, Helen Zille and the other minority whites, and then now ANC, it will be split 4 ways and would never have the super majority that ANC has been having. It all goes back to leadership. I pray that African leaders can change their ways. I truly believe that we can be self-sufficient, even this country, Fred. Fred, we have an economy that is heading towards 18 trillion shillings in as far as the GDP is concerned. It means KRA is capable of collecting at least 6 trillion shillings to be able to fund our own activities. We just need a good governance structure, KRA to be thorough, and then the money be invested in production, because the only way you can earn more is by producing. But if you're only budgeting for consumption, then our economy will never grow. But if you can decide, we said it here many times before, that, for example, adopt industrialization as a policy of government, that every year we have to put a certain percentage of our budget into manufacturing and production, and say we have 200, 300 sub-counties, we're going to be putting $1 billion every year for industrialization. That's 300 billion shillings. So that when John Buddy takes a 3 trillion shillings or 4 trillion shilling budget to Parliament, he has 10% that will go into manufacturing, so that we are producing. So we are constantly, adding value and creating jobs. If you do that for the next 10 years, then you're able to sink almost 3 trillion in manufacturing, and we'll be able to do almost, if you're doing $1 billion, can give you about 10 light industries, those cottage industries that you do in the village, milk processing, or a small milling plant for maize meal. That means we'll be able to do 10 per sub-county. 300 sub-counties, it means every year the government will be creating 3,000 factories, isn't it? So if you do that for 10 years with 30,000 factories, then we'll be talking of a different economy. And that money, we have it. But then it depends on the kind of leadership that we elect.
As you close.
I think just to summarize everything is that since we are talking about leadership, in 2 years to come we are going into the poll. We've been in this country for quite some time, and we've always been complaining about bad governance, leadership, corruption, and everything. This provides Kenyans with opportunity. In 2027, we only have 2 options: either to elect leaders, because I believe in this country we have leaders whose interests are for the benefit of this country, just like my brother Ngaira says, and who always want to see this country prosper. But the problem is we Kenyans, because we are enemy of Kenyans. Kenyans are the enemy of Kenya itself. So I think in the next 2 years, it is time for us to decide whether we are going to vote to change this country, to cut the size of government. As you can see today, yesterday, the Right Honorable Prime Minister was in Senate.
Yes.
If you listen to the conversation was not about cutting the size of the government, but was even enlarging the oversized government.
Yes.
So it's a time for us Kenyans to sit back and ask ourselves, is this the kind of government we want? Do we continue complaining? I always say one thing: if you are faced with a problem, you only have 2 options, friend. Number 1, accept it, that I have a problem, do nothing about it, complain. Sit down and just complain. Number 2, accept I have a problem, stand up, find solution to the problem, and solve it once and for all. You don't just face it and solve it. And that is the same case we are having in this country. 2027, we are going to the poll. We are going to elect 290 MPs, 47 women rep that are doing nothing, 47 senators and 47 governors who have just turned our counties to their milking cow. But as Kenyans, we have a duty to perform, whether to elect good leaders that will transform this country, or to give the same faces that we've seen for ages, changing from one political party to another, saying one story, just changing, confusing Kenyans. We continue electing such kind of leaders, and we complain. And as I said, if in 2027, we will allow this kind of leadership to continue, then there is no even any need complaining about the problem. Already we've accepted that we have the problem. We have corruption in this country. We have tribalism is killing us. Poverty, rate of unemployment. All this can only be solved if we get good leadership. And the good leadership, we can only get them at the ballot. So for us to stop complaining, it is time for us to stop complaining and act on it. First, by electing good leaders right from the MCA to the president. But even if today we elect a good president, that president that has got what it takes to transform this country, and we decided to elect the like of Oscar Sudi and my friend Junet Mohammed as the MP, then generally we have not solved anything. Because our constitution gives these MPs the power even to impeach the president. So they can just decide to go the Rigathi Gachagua way and do away with the president. So I think I want to plead with Kenyans that our reform agenda should start from the MCA to the president. We have men and women of integrity that can lead this country into prosperity. Let's give such kind of individual a chance to solve the problem we are having and elect those who will give this country future. Not election based on tribe. You don't need to be a Luo for me to vote for you. You don't need to be a Kikuyu or a Kalenjin to be elected. All you need to have is have that Kenyan in you.
Just be a leader.
Just be a leader, a good leader, and we will vote for you.
All right.
That is what I can plead to my fellow Kenyans.
It's very important because what the country is going through today is as a result of leadership, is as a result of the people we've put in different offices. President Uhuru Kenyatta once said, and shocked the country, that per day 2 billion shillings is lost through corruption every day. I don't know whether President Ruto sealed that, or right now probably it's 3 or 4 billion. You never know. But what we are saying is leadership is key. Don't vote for a leader because they are your tribe. They won't benefit you. I've had 3 Kikuyu presidents. I was buying unga the same way you're buying it. And I'm very sure even right now with for Kalenjins, the same things that are affecting every other person are the same things that are affecting them. So don't vote by your emotions. Look at the people who are presenting themselves and ask yourself, what is in it for me? Has this guy performed before? If he has not performed, there is no miracle. He will not perform. What he is, money and power simply manifest and magnify what you are. If you were a thief before you got money, when you get money, you'll just become a bigger rich thief. If you are corrupt before you got money, money just magnifies who you are. So leadership is very, very key. So you have your ID and your vote. Gen Zs, whoever, people who have not voted, take your ID, when the time comes, register yourself as a voter and make the decisions for this country. Sindio? All right, with that, we got to bring down the curtains on the show. Do have yourself a lovely morning.